Varen Ashcroft had not felt anything in 3 years. Not joy, not rage, not the raw pull of his wolf beneath his skin. Nothing. The beast that had once roared through his veins had gone silent the night Aelith died, curling into some dark corner of his soul and refusing to stir. 3 years of hollow silence where the bond used to hum. 3 years of waking in a bed that smelled less and less like her with every passing season until all that remained was cold linen and the ghost of something he could no longer name. So when the scent hit him in the middle of a crowded healing ward, his body reacted before his mind could catch up. He stopped walking. His hand shot out and caught the doorframe, his knuckles going white against the wood. Behind him, Fenwick nearly collided with his back. "Your Majesty?" Varen did not answer. His lungs had locked. His wolf, dormant for 3 years, 3 brutal and silent years, surged to the surface so violently his vision blurred and his teeth ached with the beginning of a shift. The scent was impossible. Blackthorn and rain-washed stone, and something warm beneath it, something sweet and alive that he would know in any world, in any life, across any distance. Aelith. His dead mate's scent, threading through the bitter smell of healing tonics and fevered bodies like it had every right to be there. Like 3 years of grief and an unmarked grave meant nothing at all. Varen turned slowly. The healing ward was full. Cots lined both walls, occupied by soldiers and townspeople struck by the marsh fever that had swept through the lower districts. Healers moved between them in linen masks, their faces half hidden, their hands stained with tincture. The air was thick with sickness and camphor. But beneath it all, cutting through everything, was that scent. He scanned the room. His wolf clawed at his ribs, frantic, desperate, more alive than it had been since the night he had held Aelith in his arms as the life left her, and howled until his voice gave out. There. A woman crouched beside a cot near the far wall, pressing a damp cloth to a child's forehead. She wore the plain gray robes of the borderland healers, a linen mask covering her face from the bridge of her nose to her chin. She was small, unremarkable, just another body in a room full of bodies. But the scent was pouring off her in waves, and his wolf was losing its mind. Varen crossed the ward in 4 strides. Healers stumbled out of his path. A tray of instruments crashed to the stone floor, and no one picked it up. Every pair of eyes in the room locked onto the king as he stopped directly behind the masked woman, towering over her, his chest heaving, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He could hear his own pulse thundering in his ears, could feel his wolf pressing against his ribs with a force he had not felt in years. She turned, looked up, her eyes widened above the linen mask, brown and flecked with copper, and filled with pure, undiluted terror. She did not know him. He could see that immediately. There was no recognition in those eyes, no spark of familiarity, nothing but the primal fear of a small creature confronted by something far too large and far too focused on her. "Your name," Varen said. His voice came out wrecked, low and shaking in a way that made Fenwick take a sharp step forward. "Revna," the woman managed. "My name is Revna. I am one of the healers from the Ashwin Crossing. Please, I have not done anything wrong." His hand moved before he could stop it. He reached down and pulled the mask from her face. The linen fell away and revealed features he had never seen before. A narrow jaw, a scattering of freckles across the bridge of her nose, a small scar near her left temple that pulled slightly at the skin around it. Not Aelith's face, a stranger's face. But the scent was hers, identical, unmistakable, impossible. "Sire." Fenwick's hand was on his arm now, firm and grounding. People are watching. They were. Every healer, every patient well enough to lift their head, every guard at the door. All of them staring at the Alpha King who had not shown a flicker of emotion in 3 years, now standing over a masked nobody with an expression that looked like it might shatter his face. Varen released the mask. It drifted to the floor between them. Revna stared up at him with wide, frightened eyes, her pulse hammering so hard he could see it in her throat. He wanted to touch her. He wanted to bury his face in her neck and breathe until the world made sense again. His wolf howled beneath his skin, a sound so loud and raw he was certain she could hear it. "She comes with us," Varen said. "She does not leave the palace." "Sire, I do not understand." Revna stammered, rising to her feet on unsteady legs. What have I done? Varen looked at her, this woman who wore a dead woman's scent like a second skin, and something in his chest cracked open for the first time in 3 years. Something that felt dangerously, terribly close to hope. That, he said quietly, is what I intend to find out. He turned and walked out of the ward without looking back. Fenwick lingered long enough to catch the woman by the elbow when her knees gave out beneath her. What is happening? She whispered. The beta's face was unreadable, but his grip on her arm was careful, almost gentle. Something that should not be possible, Fenwick said. They brought her to a small chamber on the second floor, windowless but clean, and locked the door from the outside. Revna sat on the edge of the narrow bed and pressed her hands together in her lap to stop them from shaking. She could still feel the heat of the king's gaze on her skin, the crushing weight of his attention, the way his voice had cracked on a single question like something inside him was breaking in real time. What had she done to make the most powerful man in the realm look at her like she had just torn open a wound he thought had scarred over? The room was cold. The walls were bare stone. She pulled the thin blanket around her shoulders and tried to think, tried to reason her way through the last hour, but nothing made sense. The king had looked at her like she was a ghost, like she was something sacred and unbearable all at once. She did not sleep that night. At dawn, the lock turned and a guard appeared in the doorway, his face carefully blank. The king requires your presence, the guard announced. Immediately. The throne room was empty except for 3 people, which somehow made it worse. Revna had expected a crowd, advisors and guards, and the controlled chaos of a working court. Instead, there was silence, cold morning light falling through tall windows, and the king sitting at the far end of a long table with Fenwick standing at his shoulder like a sentinel carved from stone. Varen looked like he had not slept either. The hollows beneath his eyes were deeper than yesterday, carved into his face like bruises. His posture was rigid, his shoulders locked back, and his jaw was set in a way that suggested he had been clenching it for hours. He watched her approach the way a hawk watches movement in the grass below, patient, focused, dangerous. Revna stopped at the opposite end of the table. The distance between them felt both far too great and nowhere near enough. Sit, Varen said. She sat. Her hands were shaking again, so she pressed them flat against her thighs beneath the table where he could not see. How long have you been at the Ashwin Crossing? Fenwick asked. His voice was calm, methodical, the voice of a man who conducted interrogations regularly and had learned to make them sound like conversation. 3 years, Revna said. The healer there, Mistress Orla, found me wandering the borderlands. I had no memory of anything before that. She took me in, trained me in herbcraft. No memory, Fenwick repeated. None at all? Nothing, Revna swallowed. I woke up in a ditch with a wound on my head and no idea who I was or where I had come from. Orla gave me a name because I did not have one. She gave me a life because I could not remember my own. Silence. Varen's knuckles were white around the arm of his chair. You do not know why you are here, he said. It was not a question. No, Your Majesty. 3 years ago, Varen said, his voice controlled in a way that suggested the control was costing him everything. My mate was murdered. Her convoy was attacked on the North Road while returning from a diplomatic visit. Her body was found in the wreckage. He paused. The muscle in his jaw jumped. She was identified by the ring on her hand. The convoy guards confirmed her death. My senior advisor, Lord Marin, oversaw the recovery of the site personally. Another pause. Heavier. I buried her. Revna's breath caught. She did not understand why he was telling her this, but the raw grief in his voice made her chest ache with an empathy so sharp it felt physical. This was not a king speaking. This was a man still bleeding from a wound 3 years old. You carry her scent, Varen said. Identical. A bonded mate's scent cannot be replicated. It cannot be manufactured or transferred or mimicked. It is as unique as blood, as singular as a voice. No 2 wolves in the history of our kind have ever shared a scent signature. The room seemed to tilt. Revna gripped the edge of the table. That is not possible, she whispered. I am no one. I am a borderland healer with no family and no past. And yet here you are. Varen said, smelling exactly like my dead wife. The word wife landed in the silence like a stone in still water. Revna opened her mouth to respond and found she had nothing. No defense, no explanation, nothing except the drumming of her own pulse and the irrational, terrifying feeling that something deep inside her had just stirred at the sound of his voice, something she had no name for. Fenwick broke the silence. We would like to conduct a formal scent verification. The court physician and 2 senior wolves will confirm independently whether the match is genuine. And if it is? Revna asked. Fenwick glanced at the king. Varen did not look at either of them. He was staring at the table, at his own white-knuckled hands, and the expression on his face was one Revna recognized from the healing ward. She had seen it on the faces of people who had been given news they could not survive but had not died yet. Hope, the most dangerous kind. The kind that comes after you have already accepted the worst. If it is, Fenwick said carefully, then everything we believed about the Queen's death may be wrong. The scent verification took place that afternoon in a sealed chamber with 3 witnesses. Revna stood in the center of the room while the court physician, a severe woman named Dreslin, circled her slowly. 2 senior wolves flanked the doorway, their nostrils flaring, their expressions tight with concentration. No one spoke for a long time. Dreslin paused behind Revna, leaned closer, then moved to the table where a sealed wooden box sat open. Inside were folded garments and a length of ribbon, and even from where she stood, Revna could see they were old and carefully preserved. Then Dreslin straightened and turned to Fenwick. It is a match, she said, complete and undeniable. Every marker, every layer, every base note and secondary compound. I have compared it against the archived scent samples from the Queen's personal effects. She paused, her expression troubled. This woman carries the Queen's scent down to the cellular level. This is not contamination or coincidence. Biologically speaking, this is the same person. She hesitated, then added, the facial structure differs from the Queen's portraits, but 3 years of malnourishment and borderland exposure can alter soft tissue considerably. The scar on her temple suggests significant trauma. The bones beneath are consistent. The silence that followed was deafening. Revna felt the blood drain from her face. That cannot be right. I am not your queen. I do not remember any of this. I do not remember him. But even as she said it, something tugged at the back of her mind. A sensation she could not name. Like a word sitting on the tip of her tongue just out of reach. Like a melody she knew but could not quite hum. Fenwick dismissed the witnesses and escorted her back to her chamber. At the door, he paused. The king has ordered that you remain in the palace until we understand what happened to you. Am I a prisoner? Revna asked. You are a mystery, Fenwick replied. And the king does not handle mysteries well. He hesitated, then added, more quietly. He nearly destroyed himself searching for answers after the queen died. He sent scouts to every corner of the realm for 18 months. He stopped eating. He stopped sleeping. He stopped ruling. The court nearly fractured around him. Fenwick's voice dropped. His wolf went silent the night she died. It has not stirred since. He looked at her steadily. Until yesterday. The door closed. The lock turned. Revna pressed her back against the cold stone wall, slid to the floor, and wrapped her arms around her knees. She was not the queen. She could not be. Queens had histories and bloodlines and memories. She had a scar on her temple and a name a stranger had given her, and 3 years of borrowed life in a borderland clinic. But her hands were trembling, and somewhere deep in her chest, in a place she had not known existed until yesterday, something was pulling, faint but persistent, like an invisible thread tied to a hook buried beneath her ribs, and the other end was somewhere in this palace, attached to a man with hollow eyes who looked at her like she was the answer to a question that had been killing him for 3 years. She pressed her hand to her sternum and felt it, the pull, and for the first time in 3 years, she was afraid of what she might find if she followed it. 3 days passed. 3 days of locked doors and delivered meals in silence so thick Revna could hear her own heartbeat in the empty room. No one came except the guard who brought her food twice a day, and the physician Dreslin, who drew blood and asked clinical questions and never once smiled. Revna answered everything honestly because she had nothing to hide, which made the whole experience more frustrating. She was not a spy or an imposter. She was a healer from a border village who had been minding her own business until a king with grief-wrecked eyes had ripped the mask off her face and upended her entire life. On the fourth morning, the lock turned and someone new walked in. Revna knew her by reputation only. Thessaly, the king's personal healer, the woman who had tended to the royal household for longer than most courtiers had been alive. She was tall, sharp-featured, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a severe knot, and eyes that missed absolutely nothing. She moved with the unhurried confidence of someone who had seen every possible crisis and was not impressed by any of them. "So," Thessaly said, closing the door behind her and surveying the small room. "You are the one who has turned the palace upside down." "I did not mean to turn anything upside down," Revna said quietly. Thessaly studied her for a long moment, then pulled a chair to the bedside and sat with the air of someone settling in for a lengthy conversation. "I knew Aelith," she said. "The queen. I delivered her tonics when she had headaches, dressed her wounds when she trained too hard in the sparring yard, held her hair back when she was sick during the early weeks of pregnancy." Revna's stomach dropped. "Pregnancy?" "She lost it," Thessaly said, her voice even but not unkind. 3 months along, 2 weeks before the convoy attack. The grief nearly broke her. The king did not handle it well either. He blamed himself for letting her travel so soon afterward, though she had insisted. She paused. They were not a perfect pair, Aelith and Varen. They argued constantly. She thought he was overbearing and overprotective. He thought she was reckless and stubborn. But the bond between them was so strong you could feel it standing in the same room with them, like heat from a fire. It changed the air. Revna listened, her throat tight, trying to reconcile these intimate details with the hollow-eyed king she had seen in the throne room. "When she died," Thessaly continued, "or when we believed she died, the bond severed. I watched it happen. I was standing 10 feet away. The king dropped to his knees in the middle of the great hall and screamed. Not a human sound. The sound a wolf makes when its mate is ripped away, when the bond tears free like a living thing being pulled from the chest." She paused again, and for the first time, something flickered across her composed features. Pain, maybe, or the memory of it. His wolf retreated that night and never came back. Lord Marin and the council managed the kingdom for nearly a year while Varen searched. Marin handled everything, quietly and efficiently, kept the court together when the king could not. Thessaly's gaze sharpened. 3 years, and nothing has reached him. Not healers, not council, not the dozens of eligible wolves his advisors have paraded past him hoping to trigger a new bond. His wolf is a ghost. He rules this kingdom on discipline alone. No instinct, no connection, no feeling. He functions, but he does not live. She leaned forward. "And then you walked into the healing ward, and his wolf woke up. For the first time in 3 years, it stirred. Do you understand what that means?" Revna shook her head, though she suspected she did. "It means either you are Aelith," Thessaly said, "or something has been done to you that has never been documented in the history of our kind. Scent cannot be stolen or transplanted. It is encoded into the marrow, woven into the blood, which means your body knows something your mind does not." The words settled over Revna like cold water, but I do not remember anything, nothing. Not his face, not this palace, not a pregnancy, not a bond. How can I be someone I have no memory of being? "That," Thessaly said, "is the question that is keeping the king awake at night, among other things." "Other things?" Thessaly hesitated, which Revna was beginning to understand was rare for her. "Your presence in the palace is having an effect on him. The proximity alone, even without direct contact, even separated by walls and corridors and 3 floors of stone, has begun to shift something in his wolf. He is feeling things he has not felt in years. It is not comfortable for him." Revna thought of the tug in her own chest, the invisible thread that pulled constantly toward some unknown anchor point somewhere above her in this palace. It had not eased since they brought her here. If anything, it had grown stronger with each passing day. What kind of things? She asked carefully. The bond is trying to reform, Thessaly said bluntly. His wolf recognizes you. It does not care about memory or logic or whether you call yourself Revna or Aelith or anything else. It knows your scent, and it is trying to reconnect. Revna's pulse spiked. Can it? Not while something is blocking your memories. The bond needs both ends to complete. His wolf is reaching, but yours is not reaching back. Not fully. Thessaly tilted her head, watching Revna with clinical precision. Do you feel anything at all? Any pull? Any instinct? Any physical sensation you cannot explain? Revna almost lied. Almost said no, nothing, I feel nothing. But Thessaly's gaze was steady and unflinching and somehow safe in a way Revna had not expected from the king's personal healer. I feel a pull, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. In my chest, like something is hooked beneath my ribs and tugging. It started the moment he spoke to me in the ward. It has not stopped. Thessaly nodded slowly. Your wolf is in there, buried maybe, caged maybe, but alive. She stood and smoothed her skirts. I am going to recommend to the king that he spend time in your presence. Controlled sessions, supervised by me. If the bond is trying to reform, proximity may trigger memory recovery. Revna's heart lurched. He will not agree to that. He already has, Thessaly said from the doorway. He agreed before I walked in here. She paused, something softening in her expression. He is terrified, Revna. Not of you, of hoping. He buried his mate 3 years ago, and now a woman with her scent is sleeping 3 floors below him and his wolf will not stop howling. He is holding himself together with nothing but will and habit, and both are wearing very thin. She opened the door. Tomorrow morning, the king's private study. Fenwick will escort you. The door closed. Revna sat in the silence and pressed her hand to the ache in her chest. It was stronger now, warmer, and for the first time, she could have sworn she felt it pull back. The king's private study smelled like ink and old leather and him. Revna noticed the third thing first and hated herself for it. Fenwick led her inside and gestured toward a chair, positioned near the window, a deliberate distance from the desk where Varen sat reviewing documents. Close enough for proximity, far enough for propriety. The arrangement had Thessaly's fingerprints all over it. Thank you, Fenwick, the king said without looking up. The beta inclined his head and left. The door clicked shut. Silence filled the room like water filling a glass, slow and heavy and rising toward a level neither of them was ready for. Revna lowered herself into the chair. She folded her hands in her lap. She looked at the window, at the bookshelves lining the far wall, at the carved mantel above the unlit fireplace, at literally anything other than the man behind the desk who was pretending to read while his pen had not moved a single inch since she entered the room. You can breathe, Varen said. I am breathing, Revna replied, then realized she had in fact been holding her breath. She exhaled sharply and felt heat crawl up her neck. Another silence. His pen scratched against parchment. The clock on the mantel ticked with maddening precision. How long are we supposed to do this? She asked. Thessaly suggested 2 hours. 2 hours of sitting in a chair? Would you prefer to stand? Revna bit the inside of her cheek. This was going to be very long. The first session passed in excruciating awkwardness. Varen worked. Revna sat. Occasionally, she glanced at him, and occasionally she caught him glancing at her, and both of them looked away so quickly it would have been comical if it were not so painful. She studied the bookshelves to pass the time, reading the spines from her chair across the room. Military strategy, territorial law, agricultural reform, wolf bonding theory in volumes thick enough to prop open a door. And tucked between 2 heavy legal compendiums on the third shelf, a slim book with a cracked spine and no title on its cover. That one, Revna said, pointing before she realized she was speaking. Varen looked up. What? The small one, between the law books. Third shelf, near the left edge. She frowned, a strange certainty settling over her like a chill. It is poetry. Valdesi poetry, the one about the sea. The silence that followed was different from all the others, heavier, charged with something electric and fragile. Varen stood slowly. He crossed to the shelf, pulled the slim volume free, and opened it. The pages were soft with age, the binding cracked from use. His face went pale. "How did you know that?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Revna's heart hammered. "I do not know. I just knew. I looked at the shelf and I knew what it was, like I had reached for it 100 times before." Varen stared at her. Then he looked down at the book in his hands, and something shifted in his expression that Revna could not read. Something between wonder and agony, both fighting for the same space on his face. "Aelith gave me this book," he said, "on our bonding anniversary. She said the poems reminded her of home." The ache in Revna's chest surged so sharply she pressed her hand to her sternum. Varen's gaze dropped to the movement, and she watched his throat work as he swallowed. "We are done for today," he said abruptly, and set the book on the desk face down, as if he could not bear to look at it any longer. But they were not done. They came back the next morning, and the morning after that, and the morning after that. The session stretched from 2 hours to 3, then to 4. Thessaly checked in daily, asking careful questions, recording observations in a leather notebook she carried everywhere. The proximity was working, she reported. Varen's wolf was stabilizing. His sleep, while still broken, was less tormented. The constant low growl that had vibrated through his chest for 3 years had begun to ease. But the changes in Revna were stranger and harder to explain. She started knowing things. Not remembering, exactly, but knowing. The way you know where the ground is without looking down. She knew that the third step on the east staircase creaked. She knew that the kitchen garden had rosemary planted near the south wall and thyme near the north. She walked a corridor she had never been in before, and turned left without hesitation. And when Fenwick asked why, she said, "Because the library is this way." It was. "Your body remembers this place," Thessaly told her during a private examination. "Even if your mind does not. Muscle memory, spatial awareness, instinctive navigation. These are stored differently than conscious recollection. Whatever erased your memories did not reach deep enough to take these." Revna stared at her hands. "What if I never remember? What if my body knows things I will never understand?" "Then we keep trying," Thessaly replied simply. The sessions with Varen grew less painful as the days wore on. He still worked while she sat, but the silence softened into something companionable rather than fraught. She began bringing herb work with her, preparing poultices and sorting dried plants at the side table Fenwick had quietly installed near her chair. The smell of lavender and chamomile filled the study, layering over the ink and leather, and replacing the staleness with something alive. One afternoon, she looked up from her work to find Varen watching her with an expression so raw and unguarded she forgot how to speak. "She used to do that," he said. His voice was barely audible. "Sit in that exact spot and sort herbs while I worked. The room smelled like this every day for 2 years." Revna's hand stilled over the dried chamomile. "I am sorry." "Do not be." He cleared his throat and looked away. "It is the first time this room has felt like anything other than a tomb." She did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing, and the silence that followed was warm in a way none of the previous silences had been. Small things began to appear. A better chair, thicker and cushioned, replacing the wooden one she had been using. A lamp positioned at exactly the right angle for her herb work. A cup of tea, still warm, waiting on the side table when she arrived one morning before he did. "Thank you for the chair," she said that afternoon. "What chair?" Varen said, not looking up from his report. "And the lamp." "I do not know what lamp you are referring to." "And the tea?" The faintest flush crept up the back of his neck. "Fenwick handles refreshments." Revna bit her lip to keep from smiling. And something in her chest pulsed with a warmth that had nothing to do with herbal tea, and everything to do with the man pretending not to care while quietly rearranging his study around her comfort. It happened on the 9th day. She was sorting valerian root when a wave of dizziness hit her so hard the room spun. She gripped the table edge and squeezed her eyes shut, and behind her eyelids, a burst of color and sensation exploded through her mind. A garden. Late afternoon light turning everything golden, hands in dark soil, planting something small and green, laughing at the dirt under her fingernails. A voice behind her, deep and warm and impossibly familiar. "You have got dirt on your face." Turning, still laughing, and seeing a man silhouetted against the low sun. A man whose shape she knew in her bones, whose scent wrapped around her like coming home, whose hand reached out and wiped the smudge from her cheek with a gentleness that made her whole body ache with longing for something she could not name. Revna gasped. Her eyes flew open. She was gripping the table so hard her knuckles had gone white. Valerian root was scattered across the floor. And Varen was already on his feet, halfway across the room, his face sharp with alarm. "What happened?" he demanded. Revna looked at him. Really looked. And for one disorienting, devastating second, she saw two men standing in the same space. The hollow, guarded king in front of her, and the younger, softer version from the vision, reaching for her face in a sunlit garden, with a smile she had never seen this version of him wear. "I saw something," she whispered. "A garden. Dirt on my face. Someone's hand." Varen went very still, every muscle in his body locked. "Your hand," Revna said, her voice cracked. "It was your hand." Thessaly stood very still for a very long time after Revna finished describing the vision. Then she turned to Varen, who stood rigidly by the window with his arms crossed and his shoulders locked tight enough to snap. "The herb garden behind the east wing," Thessaly said. "That is where you and Aelith used to spend your afternoons. She planted the entire bed herself. Chamomile, lavender, thyme, everything Revna has been sorting in your study." Varen said nothing, but a vein in his temple pulsed visibly, and his breathing had changed, gone shallow and controlled in the way of a man fighting to hold himself together. "The memories are surfacing," Thessaly continued, her tone clinical but not cold. "Not through conventional recall, through sensory triggers. Scent, environment, routine, physical proximity. Her body is rebuilding pathways that something severed." She paused, choosing her next words with visible care. "Which brings me to the next step." "No," Varen said. Thessaly ignored him. "Physical contact," she said to Revna. "The bond is trying to reform, but it cannot complete with only one side reaching. Your wolf is buried beneath whatever took your memories. Direct physical contact with the king, skin to skin, will give your wolf the strongest possible signal. It may accelerate the memory recovery significantly." "I said no," Varen repeated, his voice harder now. "You said no before the proximity sessions," Thessaly reminded him. "And those have produced more results in 9 days than 3 years of searching. The proximity sessions do not require her to touch me." "And the proximity sessions have reached their limit," Thessaly said firmly. "She had a sensory episode today. A violent one. The memories are pressing against whatever wall is holding them back, and they are going to keep pressing whether you approve or not. Would you rather she has these episodes alone and unanchored, or with someone beside her who can ground her through it?" Varen's hands curled into fists at his sides. Revna watched the war play out across his face with an ache that surprised her in its intensity. The desperate want battling the fear, the hope fighting the discipline, neither side winning. "It does not have to be much," Thessaly said, her tone gentling. "A hand, brief contact, enough to give her wolf something to reach toward." The silence stretched thin as wire. Varen's gaze moved to Revna, and what she saw in his eyes made her breath catch. Raw, exposed, terrified hope, the kind that knew exactly how much it had to lose because it had already lost everything once. "Fine," he said. The word sounded like it cost him something vital. They began that evening. Fenwick escorted Revna to the study as usual, but this time Thessaly was present, standing quietly by the door with her leather notebook. Varen sat in his chair behind the desk. Revna sat in hers by the window. The distance between them felt like a canyon with no bottom. "Whenever you are ready," Thessaly said. Neither of them moved. "Today would be ideal," Thessaly added dryly. Revna stood. Her legs felt wooden and unreliable. She crossed the room slowly, each step amplifying the tug beneath her ribs until it was almost painful, a gravity pulling her forward that had nothing to do with choice and everything to do with something older and deeper than conscious thought. Varen watched her approach with an expression that reminded her of a man bracing for a blow he had been expecting for years. She stopped in front of the desk, extended her hand, palm up. "Just a hand," she said softly. "That is all." Varen looked at her outstretched hand like it might be the most dangerous thing in the room. Then, slowly, with the deliberation of a man reaching into fire, he reached out. The moment his fingers touched hers, two things happened simultaneously. His wolf surged. She felt it through the contact, a massive, overwhelming presence crashing against the surface of his control like a wave against a seawall. His hand spasmed around hers, his grip tightening convulsively, and a sound tore from his throat that was not quite human and not quite animal, but something between the two that made the hair on her arms stand up. And inside Revna, something answered. Deep in her chest, beneath the tug, beneath the warmth, beneath everything she had been feeling for 9 days, something stirred. Not a memory, not a thought. Something older and more primal. A presence she had not known was there, lifting its head in the dark. Her wolf, buried, chained, barely conscious, but alive. And it knew him. Revna gasped. The room tilted sideways. Varen was on his feet instantly, his other hand catching her elbow, and the doubled contact sent another shock through her system. Colors burst behind her eyes like shattered glass. A hall, enormous, candles everywhere, hundreds of them, filling the air with warm golden light and the smell of beeswax. A dress that felt heavy and unfamiliar on her body, silk and embroidery, and a train she kept stepping on. Music playing, strings, and something low and resonant she could feel in her ribs. His hand on her waist, warm through the fabric, steadying her. His voice in her ear, low enough that only she could hear. Breathe, Aelith. It is only a dance. Laughing despite her nervousness because he looked so serious saying it. His smile in response, rare and real and radiant, meant only for her. She came back to the present with a gasp, her fingers white around his hand, tears streaming down her face before she could stop them. A dance, she managed. A hall with candles. You told me to breathe. Varen's expression shattered. He did not pull away. His hand shook in hers, and she watched him fight for composure and lose, watched the tears he refused to shed turn his gray eyes to glass and spill over anyway. Our bonding ceremony, he said, his voice wrecked. Your first dance as queen. You were terrified of tripping on your dress. Thessaly's pen had stopped moving. The healer stood motionless by the door, watching them with bright, careful eyes and the expression of a woman witnessing something she had stopped believing was possible. Every day, Thessaly said quietly. Physical contact, every day from now on. Revna, I want you to tell me every vision you have, every sensation, every fragment, no matter how small. The days that followed were a slow unraveling. Each touch brought more. Not floods of memory, but fragments, sharp and vivid and devastating in their specificity. The feel of rain on her face while standing on a balcony at night, his coat draped over her shoulders because she had forgotten her own. A book being read aloud by firelight in a voice she now recognized as his, younger and lighter and unburdened by loss. The smell of bread baking and the sound of her own laughter in a kitchen she could not quite place, flour on her hands, someone's arms around her waist from behind. But it was his face she saw most often. Younger, brighter, a version of Varen that existed before grief had hollowed him out and turned him to stone. She saw him smile and wanted to weep because the man sitting across from her had forgotten how. She saw him laugh and felt her own ribs ache because she had never heard that sound in this life and desperately wanted to. The ache of separation grew harder to bear with each passing day. When she left the study each evening, the walk back to her chamber felt like wading through deep water, every step heavier than the last. When she arrived each morning, the relief of seeing him was so sharp it frightened her in its intensity. Something is wrong, Revna told Thessaly one evening, pressing her hand to the ache beneath her sternum. The tug is getting stronger, but the memories still feel locked behind a wall. Like something is holding them in place, like a door that opens a crack and then slams shut. Thessaly frowned. A wall? I can feel it, Revna said. When the visions come, they break through for a moment, but then something shoves them back. And it hurts, Thessaly. It hurts more every time, like something is punishing me for trying. The healer's expression shifted from clinical interest to something sharper and more alarmed, like something is actively preventing the memories from returning. Yes, Revna whispered, exactly like that. Thessaly was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice had lost its usual detached calm. That changes things considerably. If the memory loss is not trauma or injury, if something is actively holding those memories hostage and fighting to keep them locked away, then we are not dealing with damage. Her eyes met Revna's, and what Revna saw in them made her blood run cold. We are dealing with a curse. Varen took the news about the curse the way a man who has been drowning takes the news that the water is also poisoned. Silently, with a stillness that was more frightening than any rage could have been. A curse, he repeated. Thessaly nodded. The symptoms align precisely. Memory suppression that resists natural recovery. An active barrier that pushes back when challenged. Physical pain when the memories attempt to surface. Someone deliberately erased this woman's identity and placed a mechanism to ensure it never returned. Who? The word came out low and lethal. I do not know. But whoever did this had access to powerful magic, and they had access to Aelith on the night of the convoy attack. Thessaly let the implications settle in the air between them like smoke. The body in the wreckage was identified by a ring, Varen. Not by scent, not by bond confirmation, by a ring that could have been placed on anyone's hand. Revna watched the color drain from the king's face, watched the terrible comprehension settle over him layer by layer, each one worse than the last. His mate had not been murdered. She had been taken, stripped of her memories, and abandoned on the borderlands to wander like a lost animal while he buried a stranger in a queen's tomb and mourned a woman who was still alive and breathing and alone. 3 years, Varen said. The words sounded hollow, scraped out from somewhere deep and raw inside him. She was out there for 3 years, alone, with no memory, no protection, no pack, and I stopped looking. You believed she was dead, Fenwick said from the doorway, his voice steady and measured. Everyone did. The evidence was conclusive. I should have known. Varen's voice cracked on the last word like ice giving way beneath a man's weight. The bond. I should have felt that she was still alive. A true mate knows. Every story, every legend, says a true mate knows. The curse severed the bond's signal, Thessaly said gently. It was designed to. You could not have known. No one could have. But Revna could see it did not matter. Logic did not touch this kind of guilt. He blamed himself with a ferocity that made the air in the room feel thin and insufficient, and no amount of reason was going to reach him through the wall of self-recrimination he was building brick by brick behind his eyes. That night, Revna had the worst episode yet. She was lying in her chamber, staring at the ceiling and listening to the distant sounds of the palace settling into sleep, when the vision slammed into her without warning. No gentle surfacing, no gradual fade-in. It hit like a physical blow to the base of her skull, and she screamed. Fire, horses shrieking in terror, rain hammering down so hard it stung her skin, hands dragging her from a carriage, rough and merciless, fingers digging into her arms hard enough to bruise. A face above her, hooded, features hidden in shadow, pressing something cold and metallic against her temple. A voice whispering words in a language she did not recognize, but that her body understood on some primal level as wrong. Then the terrible, catastrophic sensation of something being torn away, pulled from her mind like pages being taken from a book one by one. Her memories, her name, her bond, everything that made her who she was, pulled out by the roots while she cried out and no one came. She came back to the present, trembling on the floor of her chamber, her nose bleeding, her body rigid with pain that had no source and no cure. The guard outside heard her fall and burst through the door. Within minutes, Thessaly was at her side, pressing cool cloths to her forehead and checking her eyes for dilation. Within minutes more, so was Varen. He dropped to his knees beside her without hesitation, pulling her upright, wiping the blood from her face with hands that shook so violently he could barely hold the cloth. His composure was gone. The mask he wore for the court and the council and the kingdom was in pieces on the floor, and the man beneath it was raw and terrified and barely holding together. What happened? He demanded, looking at Thessaly. The curse is fighting back, Thessaly said. The bond is trying to reform, and the curse is resisting the reformation. The harder the bond pushes, the more violently the curse retaliates. Varen's arms tightened around Revna. She could feel his heartbeat against her shoulder, furious and terrified, pounding so hard she could feel it in her own teeth. Then we stop, he said. No more contact, no more sessions. We stop pushing. Revna's eyes opened. No, you are bleeding, Varen said, his voice rough with barely controlled panic. The curse is hurting you. Every time we push forward, it pushes back harder. I will not allow this. I do not care about the pain. I do, he said, and the rawness in his voice made her throat close around something sharp and aching. I care. I cannot watch this happen to you. I will not. Revna reached for his face. Her hand was unsteady, streaked with blood from her nose, but she cupped his jaw and made him look at her. Someone stole my life. My memories, my name, my bond with you. They stole everything I was, and you want me to stop fighting to get it back? His eyes were wet. He did not blink. If fighting kills you, then yes. You would rather lose me twice than let me try? The question hung in the air between them like something made of glass, fragile and sharp-edged and one wrong word from shattering. Varen flinched like she had struck him across the face. His hand came up to cover hers, pressing her palm harder against his cheek, and he closed his eyes. Do not ask me to watch you die, he whispered. I will not survive it a second time. He pulled away, stood, took 2 steps back, then 3, putting distance between them with the deliberate precision of a man dismantling something precious because he believed keeping it would destroy it. No more sessions, he said. No more contact. Thessaly, find another way to break the curse. A way that does not risk her life. Varen, Revna started. That is an order, the king said. His voice was steady now, locked back behind the iron control he wore like armor. But his eyes betrayed him. His eyes were devastated. He left. The door closed behind him with a finality that felt like a burial. Thessaly helped Revna back into bed, cleaned the blood from her face with practiced hands, and checked her vitals in a silence heavy with things unsaid. He is wrong, Revna said. He is terrified, Thessaly replied. There is a difference, though both lead to the same mistakes. The separation was immediate and absolute. Varen cancelled all sessions. Revna's access to the study was revoked. Fenwick delivered the news with an apologetic expression and a firmness that made clear the decision was not negotiable and not open to appeal. Revna tried to argue. Fenwick listened patiently, respectfully, and completely without yielding. Then he locked the door. The first day was bearable. The ache in her chest throbbed dully, but she had grown used to aching. She told herself it was temporary, that Thessaly would find an alternative, that Varen would come to his senses once the fear loosened its grip. The second day was harder. The ache sharpened into something that felt like a fishhook dragging against the inside of her ribs, pulling toward a fixed point she could not reach. She could not eat. She paced her small chamber until her legs burned, then sat on the bed and pressed her fist against her sternum and tried to breathe through the mounting pressure. The third day, she heard his wolf. Not physically, not through the walls, through the incomplete bond itself, a howl so anguished and distant it might have been her imagination. But she felt it resonate in the hollow space where her own wolf stirred restlessly, pacing its invisible cage and whimpering in a voice Revna had never heard before. By the 4th day, she could not get out of bed. The room spun when she tried to stand. Her hands shook, even lying still. Her skin felt too tight, like something beneath it was trying to get out and could not find the way. Thessaly came and went, her expression growing darker with each visit. She took Revna's pulse, checked her eyes, pressed her hand to Revna's forehead, and held it there longer than seemed necessary. The bond is degenerating, she told Revna quietly. Without contact, the partially reformed connection is collapsing in on itself. Your wolf is weakening. And his? Revna asked. Thessaly did not answer, which was answer enough. The palace felt the change. Servants whispered in corridors they thought were empty. Guards exchanged glances when they thought no one was watching. The king, who had been slowly returning to something resembling life over the past 2 weeks, had reverted to the hollow, emotionless shell he had been before the masked healer ever walked into his ward. He attended council meetings with the mechanical precision of a man operating on pure discipline and nothing else. He did not eat at the communal table. He did not speak unless spoken to. His wolf had gone silent again, and everyone who served him could feel the absence like a draft through a broken window. On the 5th day, Thessaly came to Revna's chamber with a face like carved stone. "I need to tell you something," the healer said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "And you are not going to like it." Revna looked up from the pillow she had not left in hours. "Tell me." "I have been researching the type of curse used on you. Memory suppression spells of this sophistication require proximity to the victim, not just during the initial casting, but periodically afterward, to maintain the enchantment's hold." Revna frowned. "What do you mean, periodically?" "The curse needs to be maintained," Thessaly said, "reinforced, like a lock that needs returning, which means whoever cast it has had access to you since the attack, possibly at the Ashwin crossing, possibly even recently." The implication hit Revna like a wall of ice. "Someone at the crossing?" she whispered. "Or someone here?" "Possibly either. Or both." Thessaly leaned forward, her eyes sharp and urgent. "There is more. The curse is not just suppressing your memories, Revna. It is feeding on the bond. The stronger the bond grows, the more energy the curse must consume to maintain itself. That is why the episodes are getting more violent. The curse is cannibalizing the bond to stay alive." Revna's blood went cold. "So if we keep pushing, the curse eats the bond. And if you stop pushing, the bond collapses on its own from the strain of partial reformation. Either way, without direct intervention, the bond dies." Thessaly paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was stripped of its usual clinical detachment. "And based on what I am seeing in both of you, neither of you will survive its death." The room was very quiet. Revna stared at the ceiling and felt the warmth in her chest flicker and dim like a candle guttering in a draught. "Does the king know this?" she asked. "I told him an hour ago," Thessaly said. "He is in his study. He has not moved since." Revna closed her eyes. Somewhere in the palace, through walls and corridors and locked doors, she felt the faintest tremor through the dying bond. Not a howl this time. Not grief or rage or desperation. Something worse. A surrender. He was giving up. Revna did not sleep that night. She lay in the dark and felt the bond flickering in her chest like a dying ember, each pulse weaker than the last, each pause between pulses longer than the one before. Thessaly's words circled through her mind on an endless loop. "Neither of you will survive its death." She thought about Orla at the Ashwin crossing, the woman who had found her wandering the borderlands with blood on her temple and nothing in her head. Who had given her a name and a purpose and 3 years of quiet, borrowed life in a village that smelled like pine and wood smoke and the simple, uncomplicated kindness of strangers. She thought about the person she had been before that ditch. A queen, a mate, a woman who planted herb gardens and danced badly at her own bonding ceremony and loved a man whose laugh she could almost hear if she pressed hard enough against the wall in her mind. Someone had stolen that woman, ripped her out by the roots and left a shell wandering in the mud. And now that same curse was eating the only thread connecting her to the life she had lost. Revna sat up. Her body ached in ways that had nothing to do with muscle or bone. Her limbs felt heavy and wrong, like she was moving through water, like gravity had doubled while she was lying still. But the warmth in her chest was still there, faint and desperate and flickering, and she followed it the way a lost traveler follows a distant fire. She stood, crossed to the door, tried the handle. Locked. Revna knocked. When the guard opened the door, she pushed past him before he could react. He grabbed for her arm and she twisted free, stumbling into the corridor on legs that threatened to fold beneath her with every step. "Miss Revna, you are not permitted to leave your chamber," the guard said, reaching for her again. "Then drag me back," Revna said, already walking. "But I will come again. Every time you lock that door, I will find a way through it. Every single time." The guard hesitated. That hesitation was all she needed. She made it to the study through sheer will and the bond's fading warmth guiding her like a compass needle through dark water. The corridors blurred around her. Her vision grayed at the edges and narrowed to a tunnel. She passed a servant who pressed herself against the wall with wide eyes. She passed Fenwick at the top of the stairs, who stepped into her path, took one look at her face, and stepped aside without a word. He fell into step behind her instead, a silent escort. The study door was closed. She pushed it open. Varen sat behind his desk in the dark. No candles, no fire, no lamp. Just the thin gray light from the window and the shadow of a man who had stopped pretending he was holding together. He looked up when she entered, and the devastation on his face nearly buckled her knees. He had not slept. The evidence was carved into every line of his face, every hollow and shadow, every crack in the mask he no longer had the energy to maintain. Revna, he said. Her name sounded like a prayer and a wound in his mouth, both sacred and agonizing. You should not be here. And you should not be sitting in the dark waiting to die, she replied, her voice shaking but fierce. Yet here we both are. She crossed the room. Her legs trembled with every step, the bond straining between them, a bright, sharp ache like a blade turning slowly between her ribs. She did not stop until she was standing directly in front of him, close enough to touch, close enough to see the wet shine in his eyes he was no longer trying to hide or explain away. You are giving up, she said. I am protecting you. You are killing us both, and you know it. His shoulders dropped. If I let you close, the curse will destroy you. I watched you collapse on the floor. I held you while you were in pain. His voice broke on the last word, splintered like dry wood under too much pressure. Do not ask me to cause that again. Revna knelt in front of him. She reached for his hands, and the contact sent a shock through both of them that she felt in her teeth. His fingers spasmed around hers. The bond surged between them, desperate and starving, flooding her chest with warmth so intense her eyes filled with tears and spilled over before she could blink them back. Listen to me, she said. I spent 3 years as no one. No name, no past, no pack. I survived that. I built a life from nothing, from a ditch and a scar and a borrowed name. I am not fragile, and I am not afraid of pain. She squeezed his hands. But I am afraid of this. Of dying slowly in a locked room while the only person who makes me feel real sits 3 floors away choosing guilt over hope. That is what terrifies me, Varen. Not the curse, not the visions. Losing you. His composure shattered. Not cracked, not fractured. Shattered, completely and irreparably, in a way that told her it was never going to reassemble into the same shape. His hands came up to cradle her face, thumbs wiping the tears from her cheeks, and the raw hunger in his touch made her breath catch in her throat. I have wanted to hold you every second of every day since you walked into that ward, he said, his voice ragged and stripped bare. My wolf has been tearing me apart from the inside. I dream of your scent and wake up gasping. I can feel you through the walls and through the floors and through every locked door between us. And it is the most unbearable ache I have ever endured. Then stop enduring, Revna whispered. If I lose you again, he started. You will not. You cannot promise that. Neither can you, she said. But I would rather face the curse with you than die without you. That is not bravery, Varen. That is just the truth. He stared at her. She watched the last wall fall. Not slowly, not in pieces, not brick by careful brick. All at once. Like a dam giving way under pressure it was never built to hold. He kissed her. His hand slid into her hair, tilting her head exactly the way he wanted it, and his mouth found hers with a desperation that stole the air from her lungs. She kissed him back with everything she had, everything she was and had been and might still become, and the bond roared to life between them. So bright and fierce it felt like standing in sunlight after years spent underground in the dark. He lifted her, just picked her up like she weighed nothing, and she wrapped herself around him and felt his arms lock tight, felt the tremor running through his entire body, felt 3 years of grief and longing and desperate restraint pouring out of him through his hands and his mouth, and the raw, broken sound he made against her throat. What followed was inevitable, not rushed but unstoppable, like a river finding its course after a dam has broken. He was tender where she expected ferocity, gentle where she expected urgency. His hands trembled against hers, and she realized he was afraid, not of the curse or the consequences, of waking up and finding this was not real. When the bond finally sealed, it was like stepping through a door into a room she had always known but never seen. Warmth flooded through her, golden and deep and infinite, connecting her to him at a level that went beyond thought, beyond memory, beyond the reach of any curse ever crafted. She felt his wolf through the bond, massive and fierce and weeping with 3 years of accumulated relief, pressing against hers. And her wolf, caged and buried and silent for 3 years, answered. The sound her wolf made was not a howl. It was a recognition, a homecoming. They lay tangled together in the dark afterward, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear, the bond humming between them like a plucked string still vibrating with the force of what had just passed through it. Revna felt more whole than she had since the moment she had opened her eyes in that borderland ditch 3 years ago. She closed her eyes and let the warmth pull her under. The vision hit without warning, not fragments this time, not flashes or impressions or half-formed echoes. The full memory, complete and unbroken, crashing through the curse's weakening wall like a battering ram shattering rotted wood. The convoy, night, rain hammering the carriage roof, hands dragging her out into the storm. A face above her, hooded but visible in a flash of lightning that turned the whole world white for one frozen second. A face she knew, a face she had seen in this palace, sitting at the council table, leaning over maps, pouring the king's wine, whispering counsel into the king's ear with the patient, measured voice of a man who had spent 3 years steering a grieving kingdom from the shadows. Lord Marin, the king's senior advisor, the man who had planned the convoy route, the man who had been responsible for the queen's security, the man Thessaly had praised for holding the court together. His voice, cold and precise, cutting through the rain and the chaos and the screaming horses, speaking to the hooded figure beside him with the tone of a man giving instructions he had rehearsed many times. Take her memories, all of them. Leave nothing. She cannot be allowed to return. Revna's eyes flew open. She was shaking violently, her body rigid against Varen's chest. The bond blazed between them, white-hot and furious, and she knew he had felt everything. Every image, every sound, every terrible detail. Revna. His voice was barely human. Something ancient and predatory had surfaced in it, something that made the darkness in the room feel suddenly very small and very fragile. What did you see? She looked up at him, and the words tasted like ash in her mouth. I know who did this to me. Varen did not move for a long time after she spoke the name. He held her against his chest, and she felt his heartbeat change. Felt it slow from the frantic rhythm of a lover to something hard and deliberate and dangerous, the rhythm of a predator locking onto prey. Marin, he said. The word was quiet, terrifyingly quiet. The kind of quiet that comes before destruction, before the ground opens and swallows everything standing on it. I saw him, Revna said. At the convoy. He was there, in the rain, giving orders. Take her memories. Leave nothing. She swallowed hard. He planned the whole thing, Varen. The attack, the body, the ring on the dead woman's hand. All of it. Why? The question came out strangled, forced through a jaw so tight the words barely escaped. Revna closed her eyes and reached for the memory again, pushing past the pain that flared when she pressed against the curse's weakening wall. The wall was thinner now, cracked and unstable, and more details surfaced through the fractures. Marin's voice, speaking to someone in a dark chamber weeks before the attack, calm and reasonable and utterly without conscience. The bond makes him impossible to control. Remove the mate, and the king becomes manageable. A grieving king takes counsel. A broken king follows the hand that steadies him. A bonded king answers to no one. She repeated the words aloud and felt Varen's body go rigid beneath her. Every muscle, every tendon, every fiber of him locked tight with a rage so vast and controlled it frightened her more than any explosion could have. He wanted you broken, she whispered. Compliant. A king who could not feel was a king he could steer. 3 years, Varen. He has been steering you for 3 years. The silence that followed was the most dangerous sound Revna had ever heard. It lasted so long she began to wonder if something inside him had simply stopped working. Then his arms tightened around her, carefully, deliberately, with a tenderness that stood in stark contrast to the violence coiled in every line of his body, and when he spoke, his voice was controlled in a way that promised catastrophic violence later but absolute tenderness now. He will answer for this, Varen said. But not tonight. Tonight, I need you safe. Tonight, there is something more important than vengeance. The curse is still active, Revna said. I can feel it. The wall is cracking, but it is holding. Even with the bond sealed, it is holding on. Then we break it. Thessaly arrived within the hour, summoned by Fenwick, who had been standing guard outside the door and had heard enough through the oak to know that the world had shifted on its axis. The healer examined Revna, checked the bond's integrity through a series of tests that involved pressing her fingers to both their pulses simultaneously, and listened to everything they told her with sharp, unblinking focus. The curse is collapsing, she confirmed. The sealed bond is generating more force than the curse can contain. But it will not release the remaining memories willingly. It will make a final stand. What does that mean? Varen asked. It means the curse will pull her in one last time, into the memory of the attack itself. The moment the spell was cast, the moment everything was taken from her. Thessaly met Revna's eyes. You will have to relive it. All of it. From the inside. Not as a vision, but as a lived experience. And when it is over, you will have to choose to come back. Choose? Revna frowned. The curse was designed to erase identity, Thessaly said carefully, each word precise and weighted. When it breaks, everything it suppressed will flood back at once. 3 years of memories, an entire life, a complete identity. It will be overwhelming in a way that is difficult to describe. She paused. There is a risk that you lose yourself in the flood, that Revna drowns beneath Aelith, that you come back as the woman you were, but not as the woman you have become. The room went cold. Varen's hand found hers beneath the blanket and gripped with a force that bordered on painful. And if she does not go in? He asked. The curse holds. The remaining memories stay locked. The wall stays between Revna and her wolf. Thessaly held his gaze without flinching. She will survive, but she will never be whole. The bond will hold, but it will always ache, like a bone that healed crooked and can never be set right. Revna looked at Varen. He looked back at her, and she could see it written across his face as clearly as words on a page. The desperate wish to choose safety, to choose the crooked bone, to keep her here and imperfect and alive, rather than risk losing her to the flood of a life she no longer remembered. Do not, she said softly. Do not what? Do not tell me not to go. His hand shook in hers. His shoulders dropped. I am not going to lose you. Then come with me. Thessaly inhaled sharply. That is not how curses work, Revna. The bond is sealed, Revna said, turning to the healer. He felt my vision tonight. He saw what I saw, felt what I felt. The bond connects us at a level deeper than any curse. If I go in, he can follow. I know he can. I can feel it. Thessaly looked uncertain for the first time since Revna had known her, and the uncertainty sat on her face like a garment that did not fit. But Varen was already nodding, already decided, and the look in his eyes left no room for argument or alternative. If she goes, I go, he said. That is not negotiable. They lay together in the dark of his chambers, hands intertwined, the bond blazing between them so brightly Revna could almost see it, a golden thread running from her chest to his, pulsing with every shared heartbeat. Thessaly sat vigil in the chair by the fire, her notebook closed in her lap for once. Fenwick stood guard at the door. When you are in there, Thessaly said quietly, remember who you are, both of you. The curse will try to separate you. It will try to make you forget why you are fighting. Hold on to each other. Do not let go. Revna closed her eyes. She felt Varen's hand tighten around hers, felt the steady, grounding beat of his pulse against her palm. She felt the warmth in her chest, stronger now than it had ever been, and she followed it down. Down through the warmth, down through the dark, down into the memory. The convoy materialized around her with sickening clarity. Rain, darkness, the sound of horses and steel and men shouting and women screaming. She was inside the carriage, and the door was being wrenched open, and hands were reaching for her, and she could not fight them, because there were too many, and she was too small, and the rain was blinding, and the world was chaos. She felt the cobblestones against her knees when they dragged her out, felt the rain soaking through her dress until it was cold and heavy as armor, felt the press of something metallic against her temple, cruel and precise, and the voice, Marin's voice, calm and measured above the storm, as if ordering the destruction of a woman's entire identity, were nothing more than the conclusion of a productive meeting. Do it now. The curse reached for her, and the pain was blinding. She screamed, felt her memories tearing loose, felt herself dissolving at the edges, felt everything she was and had been and loved and feared shredding like cloth caught in a gale. Then a hand closed around hers in the dark, warm, steady, real. Varen. He was there, in the memory with her, standing in the rain with his jaw set and his wolf blazing in his eyes like a fire nothing could extinguish. He could not stop the memory, could not change what had happened, could not undo the curse or rewrite the past or punish the man who had orchestrated all of it. But he was there, and his presence was an anchor against the flood, and his hand in hers was the most real thing in the entire disintegrating world. I am here, he said. Hold on to me. The curse made its final assault. Memories crashed over her in waves, an entire life returning all at once like a dam collapsing. Her childhood in the northern pack, running barefoot through autumn forests. Her mother's face, kind and weathered and smelling of cedar smoke. Her first shift at 13, the terror and the wonder of it. The feeling of becoming something vast. The day she met Varen in a council hall and thought he was the most arrogant, insufferable, breathtakingly handsome man she had ever had the misfortune to encounter. Their courtship, fierce and argumentative and impossible and tender. Their bonding night, when his hands had shaken and his voice had cracked and he had told her he was afraid of not being enough. The miscarriage, the grief that had nearly torn them apart. The slow, painful work of finding their way back to each other. All of it, everything, pouring back into her mind in a torrent so overwhelming she could not breathe, could not think, could not hold on to the shape of herself beneath the weight of it. She was Aelith, drowning in Aelith's life, and Revna was slipping away like a dream dissolving in morning light. I am losing myself, she gasped. There is too much. I do not know who I am. Yes, you do. Varen's hands were on her face, his forehead pressed against hers, his voice cutting through the flood like a blade through water. You are the woman who pushed past my guards and walked into my study and told me I was killing us both. You are the woman who sorted herbs by my window and made me feel something for the first time in 3 years. You are Revna, and you are Aelith, and you are mine, and I am not letting you go. The words reached her, not because they were loud or commanding or spoken with the authority of a king, because they were true. She was Revna, the borderland healer with dirt under her nails and a borrowed name, and the stubborn, reckless, magnificent refusal to stop fighting even when a king ordered her to. She was also Aelith, the queen who planted gardens and read poetry aloud and loved fiercely and imperfectly and with her entire impossible heart. She was both. She was neither. She was something new, something forged from loss and survival and the absolute, unwavering refusal to let anyone, not a curse, not a traitor, not even a well-meaning king, tell her who she was allowed to be. She chose. The curse shattered. Not quietly, not gradually, not with the slow release of pressure easing. It broke like glass struck by a stone, and the wall that had held her memories hostage for 3 years exploded outward in a wave of golden light that poured through the bond and filled every dark corner and healed every fractured edge and burned away every shadow the curse had ever cast. Her wolf surged free. 3 years of captivity, 3 years of silence and chains and enforced darkness, and now it howled. The sound tore through the bond like a bolt of lightning, and Varen's wolf answered with a cry of its own. and the two voices twined together in a harmony so perfect and so primal it made Revna weep with a joy so deep it was indistinguishable from grief. She opened her eyes. Varen's face was inches from hers. He was crying openly and without shame, and she realized she knew every line of his face. Both versions. The younger man from the garden who had wiped dirt from her cheek, and the hollow king from the study who had left candles burning and pretended he had not. They were the same man, and she loved them both with a ferocity that felt like it could light the world on fire. "I remember," she whispered. "I remember everything." His arms came around her, and she buried her face in his neck, and they held each other in the dark while 3 years of separation and grief and stolen time collapsed between them like a wall that had never had the right to stand. "You came back," he said against her hair. "You came back." The memories did not settle all at once. They came in waves over the following weeks, surfacing at odd and unpredictable moments. The taste of a particular bread from the palace kitchens triggering a cascade of mornings she had forgotten. A corridor turning her around because her body remembered the old layout before the renovation 3 years ago. The scent of rain sending her back to the convoy for one breathless, terrible moment before Varen's hand found hers and pulled her gently forward again. She kept the name Revna, not because she rejected Aelith, but because Revna was the woman who had survived, who had built a life from nothing in a borderland village, who had walked into a king's study with blood on her face and fire in her voice and refused to let him surrender. Aelith was the woman she had been. Revna was the woman she had become. She would not erase either. She was both and neither and something entirely new, and the people who loved her learned to love all of it. Lord Merrin was arrested the morning after the curse broke. Fenwick's investigation, conducted quietly and methodically over the preceding days, had confirmed everything Revna remembered. Financial records showed payments to the same mercenary company that had attacked the convoy. Communication logs revealed correspondence with a known practitioner of forbidden magic in the Eastern Territories. The advisor confessed under the weight of evidence, his composure cracking only when Varen entered the room and stood in absolute silence, watching him with the absolute stillness of a wolf that had finally found the one responsible for everything. Merrin was removed from court in chains. The trial would come later. For now, it was enough to know the truth. Varen still woke in the night sometimes, not from curses or external torment or the pull of dark magic, but from the ordinary, deeply human fear that this was a dream, that he would open his eyes and find the bed empty and the bonds silent and 3 years of grief waiting to swallow him whole again. But Revna was always there. She slept curled against his side with her hand resting over his heart, and when he woke gasping in the dark, she murmured something half asleep and incoherent and pressed closer, and his wolf settled, and his breathing steadied, and the fear released its grip and dissolved back into the nothing it had always been. Thessaly declared the curse fully broken after 6 weeks of observation. The memories had returned. The bond was whole. Revna's wolf, freed from 3 years of imprisonment, was vibrant and fierce, and apparently quite opinionated about everything, which Varen found both delightful and occasionally exhausting. "She gets that from Aelith," he told Fenwick one morning, watching Revna argue with the head gardener about the placement of a new herb bed she was convinced belonged closer to the south wall. "She gets that from herself," Fenwick corrected mildly. Varen smiled. It was still an unfamiliar expression on his face, still something that surprised the people around him every time it appeared. But it came easier now, more often, and the hollows beneath his eyes had finally begun to fill, and the rigid set of his shoulders had softened, and his wolf, silent for 3 brutal years, sang through the bond with a contentment so deep it hummed in the stones of the palace itself. One morning, weeks after the curse had broken, Revna woke slowly to pale light and the sound of rain against the windows. Varen was still asleep beside her. His face was peaceful, truly and deeply peaceful, in a way that she had never seen before the curse shattered and had seen nearly every morning since. One arm was draped across her waist, heavy and warm and possessive even in sleep. She watched him for a moment. Then she closed her eyes, pressed her forehead against his shoulder, and let the rain carry them both back to sleep.